And with that, let's kick things off with some unused graphics. First, we got this moon texture that is believed to have been meant to be shown at sunset, and then we also have this set of textures that shows different colors of Pikmin carrying bomb rocks. Now in the game, only yellow Pikmin can carry bomb rocks, so this shows that at some point, more colors were planned to do so as well. Next is what appears to be an early prototype version of the game's banner, as seen if loading the game from the GameCube's menu. I already mentioned the moon texture, but interestingly, there's also this unused screenshot image of a blank blue screen, with the heads-up display as well as that moon texture for some reason. On top of having 777s all over, this is actually the heads-up display that is used in several early gameplay screenshots, and based on the moon appearing as part of this heads-up display, it's also theorized that it could have been used for a nighttime clock. Next up, the game also contains a folder titled Carl Texes, which contains several unused textures, including basic stuff like some control sticks, arrows, some backdrop windows, this texture featuring a blue A button, perhaps a remnant from Nintendo 64 development, with the Japanese text on the top translating to decision. And lastly are several textures of Pikmin, like this set here, as well as these textures featuring Pikmin in the yellow, blue, and red variety. And now moving on to the third dimension, Pikmin also has a few unused models. First up is this guy, known just as Cylinder, and this just appears to be an early placeholder version of the 10 pellets. I was actually able to swap this model in and view it in the game using the debug model viewer, which we'll come back to later in this video. Then next are models Key and Door, which as you'd expect are exactly what they sound like. The key is, you guessed it, used to unlock the door, and surprisingly, the functionality for it is also still intact, as seen in this footage by Debug Yoshi. Basically, bringing a key to a door will cause it to squish down into the ground. For whatever reason though, this mechanic was shelved. Then we have Old Marker, which just as the file name suggests, is an old placeholder version of the marker used to aim where Olimar moves. This marker is much larger than the one that is used in the game, and it features a large crosshair indicating the center where Pikmin will land when thrown, while the outer gray circle here indicates the maximum whistling area. Moving on, the game also has a leftover prototype model of Olimar's ship, the SS Dolphin, as seen in the game's cutscenes. Nothing too crazy, just appears less finished. Then the next two unused models are a pretty strange finding in this game. First is a model of Mario? This is a very large model, so I wasn't able to swap it into the game like I did with the Cylinder, but yeah, for whatever reason, the mustachioed fella is found left over in Pikmin. Shigeru Miyamoto has stated that the famously scrapped Super Mario 128 eventually became Pikmin, so some believe that this Mario model may be a remnant from whatever that game once was. But if you've seen my video on Super Mario 128, you know I'm kinda skeptical that the game really did turn into Pikmin. Anyways, lastly in the same vein, there's also a leftover model of a Goomba listed as Kuribo, what Goombas are known as in Japan. Interestingly, this model bears a striking resemblance to Kug, the Goomba sprite found hidden underground in Super Mario Sunshine's Pinna Park. Whatever purpose this Goomba model had, I'd be willing to bet it's the same as the Mario models. And while we're talking about unused models, there are actually two unused enemies found in the game, each with their models and even some animations left over. First is Iwa-gen, which is thought to be a compound of the words Iwa and Gen, Iwa meaning rock and Gen being short for generator, so rock generator. Iwa-gen only has one animation in which it appears to be shooting something, probably rocks if the name checks out. It appears like a three-legged vase made of stone with a patch of grass on top. A simple but still strange design. Then the other unused enemy is known as Usuba. Usuba translates to antlion, so yeah, flying antlions. Sounds fun. It also has an associated animation left in the game for it flying, and some fans have even been able to load it back into the game. Furthermore, these Usuba were apparently developed to have a large amount of health and are believed to have been able to spawn in Smoky Prog enemies. Next up, Pikmin has a lone audio file that goes unused. This short jingle is believed to have been once planned to be heard when Olimar encounters Pikmin for the first time in the game. Either way, let's have a quick listen. Now, I don't know about you guys, or if I'm just going crazy, but to me it kinda sorta sounds like the treasure chest opening jingle from the Legend of Zelda games. Moving on, Pikmin also has several bits of text that go unused, the most notable of which are some unused voyage logs and a monologue from Olimar. The first unused voyage log was to appear after collecting all 30 of the ship parts in the game. This was essentially Olimar reflecting on leaving the planet and thinking about the Pikmin he was leaving behind. This never ends up used since the game ends once you collect all 30 ship parts, giving you no time to ever read the log, and reloading the save file after completing the game will just bring you back to having 29 parts once again. The next unused log mentions how Pikmin move around with obstacles in the way, and then the last one here is just a short unused voyage log of Olimar writing, "I am so very tired." I can relate, buddy. Anyways, it's believed that this log was meant to be used if the player had failed to get all 30 ship parts by day 30. Then there's also this unused monologue, which just like the one earlier, never gets used since the game ends after collecting the 30th ship part. Here again, Olimar mentions leaving the planet and the Pikmin who have aided him. Okay, and now is when things get spicy here, as next it's time to once again check out some debugging content, and this game has a lot of it. So in addition to some debug info that can be displayed in the top left of the screen, as well as pretty much everywhere, making it super hard to see, a little debug menu is also left in. Starting from the top, the first option allows you to toggle between two different title screen menus, one with the challenge mode and one without. The next option allows you to choose between 152 of the game's monologues and read them to your heart's content. Then we have a test of the game's save screen, followed by two strange test screens. They both have various bits of text and graphics everywhere and can be panned around, but only the second one allows the user to move around the bouncing 5, which also changes colors. I'm not too sure what these screens could have been for other than testing text, sprites, and maybe text animations. Then moving on, the next option allows the user to view all memory card related prompts, such as the save file being corrupted or the memory card being incompatible. Then we have test screens for selecting a ship log, all the currently unlocked voyage logs, a test of the end of day screen, some pause menus similar to the title screen ones we saw earlier, and finally a test of the final statistics screen. Based on all we've seen here from this debug mode, it appears to have been centralized around text in the game. Next is definitely something I find more interesting than text, and that's a model test viewer that I mentioned briefly in the video earlier. As expected, this allows us to scroll through and inspect several of the game's models, including various enemies, objects, and even a blue Pikmin. Interestingly, however, for some reason I wasn't able to find models of other characters here, like the other colors of Pikmin or even Olimar himself. Either way, it was still pretty fun to scroll through all the enemies and see all their animations like this. Some of them are, they're something. Interestingly, found hidden out of normal view is this strange object that changes to a different texture depending on which character is being viewed, some being creepier than others. Now, one of the most interesting things I think about Pikmin is that left over in the game is a Windows executable file. What does this mean? Well, basically, although you do need a few extra files to get it working, with files found on the disk, you can actually run Pikmin on a Windows PC. And it comes with a whackload of extra debugging features to boot. These include more debug menus, in-game debug features, dev tools, and more. In the interest of time, I won't be covering these features in this video, and honestly, it could probably make for a whole video just by itself. Also, I'm too much of a chicken to download random DLL files on the internet to get this working, so yeah. Anyways, if you're interested in seeing or learning more about it, I'll leave a link to both the cutting room floor page as well as the video from Pikmin 526 you're seeing here down in the description below. And finally, for the last stop of this video, my favorite part as usual, Pikmin has quite a few unused areas, including test maps left over. First up, we have a course listed simply as Routes, and this is thought to be a prototype version of the game's intro impact site stage. Overall, this course looks pretty complete, minus some texturing clearly appearing unfinished. Unfortunately, there's not much else of note here. Before we move on though, we'll often be seeing objects and enemies floating in the distance, but this is actually a byproduct of loading these unused levels over one of the used ones. So basically, since these unused levels only have level geometry and collision left, these objects like boxes, bridges, enemies, etc. appear in places they normally would in the stage that is being overwritten. Yeah, I hope that made some sense. Anyways, next, similar to Route, we have a course listed as Map 6. This appears to be another early version of a stage, this time Distant Spring. The textures here look really rough, and yeah, this course is clearly unfinished. Apparently, this is the stage that was used for gameplay in an old E3 trailer for the game, so I assume this was a stage that was whipped up early on in development as a proof of concept of sorts. Also, again similar, we have E3 Play 3, and this appears to be an early version of either Forest of Hope or the Impact site. Based on the name of the course though, this was probably the one stage that was shown off at E3 of 2001. Overall though, nothing too crazy here, so let's move on. Next up we have Code Test, and unfortunately I couldn't get this one to load in with any sort of level geometry. All I saw here at first were just the various objects and enemies as they'd appear in the normal stage I overwrote. That is, until I flew up and saw this strange board thing with a strange texture. Now I can't read Japanese, but this is what Google translated the middle part to. Not sure how accurate that is, but as usual, if any of you watching can read Japanese, let us know what all of this text translates to down in the comments. According to the cutting room floor though, this course is used to test map collision codes, such as where Pikmin can be planted and such. Next up is Shape Test, and this is a pretty cool area with the word Yaku plastered all over the place. First, we spawn into an area with several open cans, as well as 3 otherwise unused models of Ramune bottles, a popular Japanese drink. The textures for each of these bottles is also different. We got this strange teal texture, this one which appears to be testing a reflection effect of sorts, as well as this one which, just like an actual bottle, appears clear. And there's even the little Ramune ball inside of it too, which I thought was a nice touch. This also appears to be the same teal texture that the other bottle uses. Both the bottle and ball texture also appear different here than the Ramune bottle that is found in the Forest Naval stage. It's unclear if these bottles were once planned to play a bigger role in the game, and it wasn't until many years later where in one of the Pikmin shorts, the bottle concept appears to have been revisited. Anyways, moving on, the other half of this course is like a small pond area. Nothing too crazy here, but man, I gotta say, the resolution of the images of nature used for the background here look amazing, like almost realistic even. Also, apparently Yaku, as seen plastered throughout the course, is thought to be short for Yakushima, the file name of the Distant Spring course, so it's believed that this test course, or at least parts of it, may have once been an early version of Distant Spring. Next up is a course listed as Play 4, and this appears to be a large test room testing various things. We got slopes, some little rooms, and even weirder things like what looks like a helicopter landing pad on top of a tree stump. And this tree stump actually uses an also otherwise unused texture that itself also has a section that doesn't even get used here. It's like we got some unused-ception going on here. Here we also have some ramps at varying angles, and as you've probably seen by now, most of the stage uses a placeholder checkered texture with a flower. Overall, a pretty slick little test room, but it absolutely pales in comparison to what we have next. The next unused course is rightfully known as Test Map, and oh, it's a test map alright. Here we got loads of stuff that you'd expect in a test map. Ramps, steps, platforms, you name it. Just like we've seen in other games here on the show like Super Mario Sunshine, Fall Guys, and more, this area was used to test movement and functionality of the player as well as other objects on different types of terrain. There's also this massive tower segment, several holes to fall down, these weird red curvy paths ranging in sizes from small to big to extra big. And similarly, there's also these plus-shaped red paths too. Just like basically all of the test rooms I've got to play around in here on the show, it was really fun and relaxing to run and fly around the different terrain here. And yeah, this was a massive test room. I honestly would not be surprised if this is the biggest single test room on Lost Bits to date. Now that's a tough unused map to follow, but last up we have 2 unused rooms, Tuto 1 and Tuto 2. 2-1 uses the same placeholder texture we saw back in Play 4, and this is another large testing area. Unfortunately though, this one doesn't have nearly as much interesting stuff. Here, highlights include several very deep holes that you can fall down, the little ramp thing here, as well as a large elevated platform at the end. I wasn't able to load it in, but as seen here, Tuto 2 appears more complete and looks like another early version of one of the game's courses. Now, based on the names of these stages, I immediately thought Tuto is short for tutorial, and yeah, this may actually be the case, but there's a bit more to it. Apparently, according to other files in the game, Tuto 1 and 2 were actually supposed to be areas used for a scrapped 2-player mode for the game. Tuto 1 obviously isn't complete, but I guess both of these stages could have served as a tutorial of sorts for that mode. It's pretty interesting that 2 early-stage GameCube games, both Luigi's Mansion and now Pikmin, had a 2-player mode that was scrapped. And those are basically all the unused areas left in Pikmin. Although the level of perceived interest was quite varied for me with all these unused areas, as always, I love playing around in them and I'm glad that they were left over. Alright, so first up, before we get to the games themselves, we can see how Parappa himself was altered from an early concept sketch. Although the design is generally the same, and the animal choice wasn't changed like a certain other PlayStation 1 mascot, the only real differences seen here are the large letter P on Parappa's shirt, as well as him wearing a backwards hat, rather than his signature toque or beanie as seen in his final design. Also, the final design opted for much more of a square head shape instead of the round one seen here. Now on to the original Parappa the Rapper for the PS1. Aside from basic regional differences like on the title screen between the Japanese and other releases, a more prominent alteration can be seen on the loading screen between the versions. So, in the original Japanese release, the loading screen has the message saying a moment, asking for the player's patience. Here this message was seen using solid dark purple blocks to block out some of the character faces in the background. Then, in the European regional revision, the opacity of these blocks was reduced, which made the underlying faces easier to see. Then finally, since "a moment please" isn't really the type of lexicon used in North America, this message was changed to read "hold on" instead. Next up, we also got a few graphics that go unused. First are a set of graphics for Cheep Cheep, the cooking chicken meant for Stage 4. These include her with her beak open, closed, as well as her facing away from the player. Then for Stage 5, there's this H texture listed as hot_H. Now this is the texture that's used on the hot gas rotating sign, so although it can be seen during the pre-rendered cutscene before the stage, this texture is never normally seen during actual gameplay. Also unused is this arrow-looking graphic listed as Entotu or Entatu. Now I tried to find out if Entotu meant something in Japanese, and apparently it's very close to Entotsu, which translates to smokestack or chimney in English. And I guess if this was meant to be seen vertically, it absolutely could have been a chimney to be used on the gas station, an adjacent building, or just somewhere else in the background. Then for Stage 6, found amongst the other graphics for the stage are these character sprites of Joe Chin, as well as this unnamed audience member. Now again, both of these characters are seen in the pre-rendered club cutscene leading up to the stage, just like the H graphic earlier, and these aren't actually ever seen or used in gameplay in the stage, like the other stage graphics around them. So based on this, it's likely that these characters were once planned to appear during gameplay, but whether it was just in the audience or in a larger role on the stage is still unclear. And lastly for the graphics are a set of them that are believed to have been meant for an also scrapped stage. So in the files of the game is a folder named S8, and this folder contains data for an unused scene which apparently was to take place after Stage 6 on the game's Cool mode. Named Stage 8 based on the name of the folder by fans, this unused scene would apparently see the player take control of Parappa during the Somebody Say Ho segment. This actually was a feature that was implemented in Parappa the Rapper 2, where you do get to control Parappa after the final stage if you complete it on Cool mode in the same way. So although it was re-implemented in the sequel, it, for whatever reason, never ended up being used in the original. And although this is referred to as Stage 8, this doesn't necessarily imply the existence of an also scrapped Stage 7. Anyways, back to the unused set of graphics. These are of PJ Barry facing both towards and away from the camera, as well as a set of different eye and mouth textures. Now, besides the pre-rendered cutscenes, PJ is only seen during gameplay in Stage 6. So the existence of his graphics outside of Stage 6 and Stage 8 being related to Stage 6 have some believing he was meant to also be seen in that scrapped ending sequence where these graphics were to be used. And last up for Parappa 1 are some unused audio files. First is a cleaner, unused version of Parappa saying oops when he messes up. Oops. Basically, due to the PlayStation's audio, the lower quality one ended up being used. Here's a comparison of the two. Oops. Oops. Thankfully, the higher quality unused one would go on to be used in Parappa 2 as well as the PS4 port of the game. Then secondly, for the unused audio, there's an alternate unused, bad, or awful ending for Stage 2. The biggest difference here is in the lyrics. The unused version goes, "That's because you gotta do it again," and for whatever reason this was changed to just, "You gotta do it again" in the file that is used. Here is a comparison again of both tracks back to back.
That's because you gotta do it again. No, while we stop the car, you gotta do it again. What?
And with that, now let's move on to the PS2 sequel, Parappa the Rapper 2. And first off, let's talk about a pre-release prototype build of the game that interestingly was actually included in a Japanese McDonald's promo disc. This demo disc was distributed about 3 months before the initial Japanese release of the game. Although it only contains the first level, it still has quite a few differences. Being a McDonald's promo, it's no surprise that many references to McDonald's were removed in the final game. Stuff like McDonald's version being written on the title screen in Japanese, the store being covered in McDonald's banners, and Beard Burger Master's prompt icon and apron are also both loving it.
You gotta love the McDonald's propaganda here. Don't they know that advertising like that? It never works.
But the golden arches aside, this demo also has a few less corporate sanctioned changes. Namely, the heads-up display here is quite different, from the meters on the bottom being different colors and just more polished in the final. The bubble thing at the top is a slightly different shape, and the rating meter here just looks much gooder in the final. And lastly, the sound effects for either completing or failing a verse are also different here from the final version. Here is a comparison. Anyways, now moving on to the final release of Parappa 2, it too has some regional alterations which put those of its predecessors to shame. Firstly, although Parappa 1's title screen differences were pretty minor, here, each regional title screen is quite different. The Japanese one just features Parappa and the game's logo, the North American one features a completely yellow logo with much more of the cast in the background, and finally, the European title screen is once again different with a title screen graphic more akin to the Japanese one. We got different placement of the game's characters, and a much bigger emphasis on Parappa's toque or beanie because, yeah, just because. Also, some lyrics in the game had to be changed for the North American release. These changes include changing references to alcohol as well as potential religious references. And strangely enough, although the lyrics in the song were altered in the North American version, I guess someone forgot to change the subtitles during the actual song.
I am the man you all know my name now. I got all cash money and fame.
Next up, Parappa 2 also has a few graphics that go unused. First are these graphics of Colonel Noodle showing off power mad and embarrassed emotions seen in the official strategy guide for the game. Now apparently these can also be found unused in the game's files and can only be seen via hacking. Next up is this graphic of a font likely used for debugging, and lastly there is an early unused model of Boxy Boy here. This one appears to more so resemble how he appeared in Parappa 1. Definitely looks pretty creepy without the textures though. Now I don't know about you guys, but I feel like we haven't covered any unused text strings for quite a while, but thankfully this game's got us covered with a bunch of normally unseen debug messages. These messages include highlights like tap group pindex over, tap set POS is over, CD search error, and come on Parappa. It seems like whoever typed these definitely enjoys using exclamation marks. And last up, just like Parappa 1, this game also has some unused audio files. First is an unused line from Boxy Boy believed to have been associated with the practice sessions.
Okay, let's try the next one.
Then next are some short clips all believed to have been intended for either an alternate intro for the game or perhaps alternate music for the loading screens. And finally and lastly are some unused background loops for the bad and awful versions of Stage 8's tracks in the game's versus mode. This part is sort of confusing, but stay with me here, hopefully I'm getting this right. Now normally in the battle mode, during Boxy Boy's intro segment, the awful version of the upcoming song will play in the background. But the background song used for Boxy Boy's preamble here is different than the awful track that is used. And outside of this intro segment, this version isn't heard anywhere else. I'll give you guys a quick comparison of the two.
Welcome to the battle mode. The rules are simple. I'll give you a phrase to play, so player 1, try to play better than I did. Then player 2, you have to try and do better than what player 1 did. We'll do a few of those and that'll be the first round.
Also, there are two unused versus background music loops for Stage 8's bad version. Here's a comparison of those. Although the signature ahs are similar, overall, the tracks have quite a lot of differences. It's really cool to see this game get a new wave of fans from the success of Friday Night Funkin', so who knows, maybe Sony will even consider publishing another sequel. But until that happens, I hope you enjoyed this video. Alright, so just like in the Parappa video, here let's start things off by looking at some pre-release content. Oh yeah, I will be referencing the Parappa Lost bits a lot in this video, so if you haven't yet watched it, be sure to do so. Anyways, first are a pair of screenshots of the game which appear to be from a prototype build, as some changes from the final can be seen. In this screenshot, which was found in a press kit for the game, we can see an early version of Stage 1. Things are mostly the same, but it can be noted that the backdrop here appears black instead of blue as seen in the final. The drum kit is different as it appears blue instead of purple and lacks the big M on the bass drum. And lastly, here Katy Cat is seen in the outfit she normally has in Stage 7 in the game, so I guess the different getup we see in the final release for Stage 1 might have been a later addition. Then next is a mysterious screenshot that's found in the Jammer Lammy handbook guide, and this appears to be a screenshot from a much earlier point in the game's development. The font for the UI here is different and is apparently the same as the one used in Parappa 1. The characters appear to be in front of some sort of brick building or something. PJ and Parappa both appear to be holding t-shirts. The graphics for the box are different on the sides. There's what looks to be some sort of debugging text on top of them, although it's very hard to read. There's no lyrics in the screenshots. Yeah, this "does anyone know more about this" was added later. And lastly, there's what appears to be an early design of Lammy in the top left and right of the screenshot. But yeah, very little is known about the screenshot, and even co-creators Ronnie Greenblatt and Masaya Matsura didn't offer any more context, as they too don't seem to know much about it. When asked, Mr. Greenblatt responded and stated, "That must be a very rare picture of UJL in development. I've never seen it before, but it does look like one of my preliminary designs for Lammy on the wall in the background. The development team would do tests for animation and sometimes make backgrounds themselves. I didn't see many of those tests, I don't remember that one." And Mr. Matsura didn't have much else to offer either, outside of just acknowledging that the top left graphic was indeed a second scrapped design of Lammy. So yeah, based on Mr. Greenblatt's answer, it's likely that some of the developers may have just been testing backgrounds and animations, and somehow this screenshot wound up in the guide. And speaking of prototype builds, there are currently 3 known pre-release builds that have made their way into the public. First up is a pre-release demo featuring the first stage of the game that's found in the PlayStation Underground Jam Pack from winter of 1999. Sadly, not too much is different in most of these builds. For this one, the title screen has some obvious color changes, as the demo version here uses yellow and green as opposed to black and red as seen in the final release. In my Parappa Lost Bits video, I mentioned a few regional lyric changes that were made for the North American release, and similarly, we can see a line that was changed in this demo, probably for similar reason. Here in Stage 1, instead of "Chop Chop Master Onions, you can play on an island," he instead says, "You can play in hell." No surprise here why this was changed, especially given the game's E for Everyone rating, but I'll have a bit more to say about this later. The next pre-release build is from a demo disc called Euro Demo 50, obviously distributed in Europe. Here, basically the only notable change is once again seen with the game's title screen, as this demo has a yellow circle on the bottom instead of, again, the red one. And lastly for the prototype builds is one that was actually just found over a month ago as I'm making this video, as part of Hidden Palace's Project Deluge. Anyways, this prototype carries a build date of January 22nd, 1999, placing it only 17 days before the build date of the final version that was launched in Japan. Now, despite how close it was to release though, there are actually quite a few changes seen in this prototype's cutscenes. There's everything from different audience members seen here walking away, a cleaner texture for the road here, as although this prototype one looks more realistic, it was really low resolution. The buildings are sometimes different in the background for some reason, some graphic layering wasn't yet finished, some backgrounds aren't yet animated in this prototype. We got a different guitar morphing animation here, hell appears more deep-fried in this prototype, and this cutscene was almost entirely different. Like I said, pretty crazy that so many changes were made between the final release and this build from only 17 days prior. There are actually a few more minor changes, and if you're interested, check out this great comparison video by Pips. I'll have it linked for you down in the description. And next up, oddly enough, the intro animation for the Nana on Sha development studio was slightly different. Instead of a kaleidoscope-like intro transition as seen in the final, in the prototype, the animation for the logo starts off with an upside-down U, which then transforms into the logo. Again, a pretty odd change to make so close to the release. And lastly for this prototype is a text graphic that appears different in the prototype listed as AL_ER. Now Google Translate is telling me that the text used in the prototype translates to just communication error, and the one seen in the final translates to something like the memory card access has failed. It's a pretty similar message, and I guess it might have been changed to be more explicit in regards to what the communication error was with. And on that note, now let's finally switch gears and talk about the final release of the game. Let's start things off here with some unused graphics. We got this off texture that's thought to have been meant to be used for selecting no guitar effects during a stage. There's these two cool textures in red and yellow, suggesting that maybe at one point the word cool would flash these colors when the player would reach cool status. There's this set of button input sprites that do look very similar to the ones that are used, but apparently a separate sheet is used instead. And also the L and R sprites here specify R1 and L1, which I don't believe is seen in the game. And then there's also these unused graphics for lessons 1 through 4. Now, lessons were seen in both Parappa the Rapper 1 and 2, and for whatever reason, they go absent in this spin-off title. So I guess the existence of these graphics suggests that the lessons might have also been intended at some point to be seen here. Next up are some low-resolution sprites of Parappa, Lammy, and Teriyaki Yoko meant for Stage 6. It's likely these were intended to be swapped in when the camera was far away from the character, so players wouldn't notice the lower quality. Then we got some unused eye textures for Parappa looking angry, as well as completely unimpressed that you haven't subscribed yet. Similarly, there's unused angry looking eye textures for Katy Cat with an angry mouth texture to match, several unused eye and mouth textures for Masan, and finally literally cross-eyed textures for both Lammy and Rammy. Interestingly, for these last Lammy textures, these were actually briefly seen in a promotional music video for Jammer Lammy Now, an arcade adaptation which we'll touch more on later in this video. But yeah, weird that these textures were only used in this video here. Then lastly for the unused graphics is a screenshot from the credit segment, also sporting this Japanese kanji symbol as well as XA player in a big red font. Now apparently this kanji here translates to temporary, signifying the placeholder nature of this image, and XA here very likely refers to the file name extension that's used for the game's music data. Then moving along, we got several alterations seen between the different regional releases of this game. Just like with Parappa and the prototypes I mentioned earlier, the final release also, unsurprisingly, features a different logo between the Japanese and worldwide releases. The Japanese logo opted to use green and purple text on fire, as opposed to the more tame red and black one seen in the other regions. Similarly, the discs themselves were quite different between the regions. It's not unusual for box art and cover art to be different between regions, but man, North America definitely got shafted with the designs here. Then, also like we saw in my Parappa video, some lyrics were altered between the regions. First off, for Stage 5, despite the stage still very much featuring logging, some lyrics were changed in reference to it only in the North American release. The line, chop all of them down, every single one down, was changed to come on and get down, way down to the low ground. Chopping trees down for the fun was changed to knowin' that we're here for the fun. And lastly, the second part of ain't this fun, having fun in the sun, I love chopping trees just for fun, was changed to I love rocking to the beat just for fun. I think it's equally likely this change was made in North America to avoid controversy with environmentalist groups, or since mentioning chopping down trees just for fun might not have been a good suggestion for kids playing this game. Also, again, like we saw in the Parappa video, although these lyrical changes were made to the audio, there's an instance where the in-game subtitles weren't changed accordingly. Not only are they not updated, they're just a mess of a hybrid of the two regions. Come on and get down, way single one down? Okay. Then lastly, for the regional changes is probably one of the biggest ones I've covered on Lost Bit so far, as the entire plot point and backdrop to the game's Stage 6 was changed. Now this goes back to that changed line I mentioned earlier, dealing with playing in hell being changed to playing in an island. Well, this is because the Stage 6 cutscene, locale, and basically everything except for most of the dialogue was changed from Lammy being sent to hell after dying in the Japanese and European release after slipping on a banana peel, to her just being flung onto an island and back in time after getting her belt stuck on a doorknob in the North American release. These changes were made in order to attain an E for Everyone ESRB rating in North America, as I suppose the inclusion of death and hell was deemed a little too much for players under 13. Other changes to the stage between versions also includes Lammy sporting a camo getup in the North American release instead of just her regular getup in the other regions, and some more lyrics were changed, like here with Angel being changed to a friend, again in line with removing the religious references.
The angel been mean to me, that's for sure. My friend's been mean to me, that's for sure.
Some pretty big changes, especially to the plotline, but I guess the developers and Sony knew that a T14 rating would likely impact sales of the game to a non-negligible extent. Then next up, we got some more unused error text strings found in the game, and again, just like in Parappa, whoever wrote these up really likes all caps and exclamation marks. Highlights here include pause error, free error, and VB is no good. And last up, Jammer Lammy contains data for a scrapped version of the first stage in which you could play as Parappa instead. Here's a quick sample of the scrapped version's audio.
Fly high, sky high, cry loud.
Additionally, there's also leftover audio files for this Parappa variant of the player winning on cool mode as well as failing the stage. Here's both.
I'm so proud of you. Congratulations.
Yeah. By the way, how have you been, teacher?
Again.
What a nightmare.
Now apparently these can be heard by playing stage 6 of Parappa the Rapper and then swapping the disc to Jammer Lammy or something. Yeah, I don't know. But otherwise this doesn't normally go used. Furthermore, oddly enough, despite being scrapped, the Parappa version of the song is apparently still found in the Jammer Lammy official soundtrack. And surprisingly, exclusive to the North American release of this game, by using this GameShark code, you can actually access this scrapped Parappa variant, though unfortunately, being incomplete, although the song functions, none of the background stuff does. Still pretty cool though. Now this scrapped Parappa version of Stage 1 would later go on to be included in the Jammer Lammy Now arcade game, a Japan-exclusive machine where players would play the game using guitar peripherals similar to how the Guitar Hero arcade machines use now. That said, these arcade machines were apparently pretty scarce, and probably even more so now. And being Japan-exclusive, I guess not many got to see this Parappa variant of Stage 1 as intended. Hopefully, if this game ever does get a modern-day remaster, they include this bit of scrapped content. But till then, if you really want the full experience, time to start booking a flight to Japan. Alright, let's start things off with some of the game's unused materia. These are present in each regional release of the game, but they appear without a name outside of the original Japanese release. There are 6 of these materia, each with a different effect, and again, these English names are just derivatives based on the given Japanese names. First are a few green materia that would have resulted in some defensive abilities. Ma Barrier, probably short for Magic Barrier, would teach the M Barrier ability, which creates a barrier resistant to magic. Reflect would teach the move Reflect at level 1, and then Wall at level 2, and then Reflect Absorb would only teach the Wall ability and only at level 2. Next is Law, a yellow materia that would have taught the Gill Toss command. It's apparently called Law due to the joke being that to hire a lawyer is to basically be throwing away money. Good one. This materia goes completely unused in the Japanese version, but it went on to be reworked into the Throw command in later releases. Then there's Booster, a blue materia that does nothing. Awesome. But it is believed that it was intended to have boosted AP gain after winning a battle. And lastly is Underwater Respiration, and this is the underwater purple materia that is given to the player to remove the 20-minute timer at the fight with Emerald Weapon. Now, while underwater is used in the North American and European versions of Final Fantasy VII, this of course goes unused in the original Japanese version as Emerald Weapon is non-existent there. Next, this game also has a few normally unused key items, 3 to be exact. These include a letter to a wife, a letter a traveling salesman in Gongaga would have asked you to deliver to his wife in Calm, letter to a daughter for some daughter who again lives in Calm, and finally, and probably one of the most well-known unused items, are the mysterious panties. Please don't get demonetized, please don't get demonetized, please don't get demonetized. Now, this item was intended to be obtained at the Wall Market Honeybee Inn scene where Cloud cross-dresses as the third underwear item. This was scrapped as the scene to obtain it was cut, but there is actually a way that these can still be obtained, but we'll get back to that in a bit. Moving on, for some miscellaneous unused stuff, we got an unused status effect as well as an unused element. The unused element is still present in a few attacks, but since most of them don't do any damage, it's irrelevant. The only attack that deals damage to have this element associated with it is the ultimate weapon's Ultima Beam. It doesn't seem to really have any effect, and at this time it's still unknown if there's even enough data left over to ever find out what it was, as it was mostly removed from the game by the developers. Then for the unused status effect, it is referenced as Duel, and while it may not do anything in the final release, based on the name it is speculated that it may have acted similarly to the double status effect from Final Fantasy VIII, which allows the player to cast 2 magic spells in one turn. This is also the effect of the W magic materia, so it is believed that this dual effect was just reworked into that instead. Then, in addition to unused status effects and elements, there's also some leftover scrapped enemy data. First, apparently both the Ho-Chu and Tonberry enemies, which can only normally be fought in the battle square, have unused data that suggests that they were planned to appear in the Ancient Forest and Northern Crater Maze, respectively. And although it's not really unused, interestingly, the Tonberry also has an attack that has a very low chance of occurring. It's called Time Damage, and the way its damage is calculated is it takes the amount of hours the player has played the game, multiplies it by 100, and then adds the minute of the next hour played. But the criteria for this move to be used is the player must pull off 3 consecutive attacks, which, like I said, is pretty rare. Anyways, next there's also an unused hidden enemy skill for dual horn enemies. This skill costs a whopping 65,536 MP and would have been used if its health dropped below 50%. And for all of that, what does the dual horn enemy get? An attack that targets a random character in the fight and does nothing. Okay, now let's shake things up a bit and shift gears to the lone audio track that goes unused in Final Fantasy VII. Well, normally unused anyway. This song is only found in the original Japanese version as well as the original PC port, and it bears the name Comical. Here, let's listen to a quick sample. This was meant to be used for a normally inaccessible alternate version of the scene with Palmer at the Honey Bee Inn. But again, that's something we'll come back to later in this video. You know what they say, where there's unused audio, there's unused text strings. So let's talk text strings. This game actually has a lot of unused dialogue strings, too many in fact, to go over in this video. First are some text strings related to the world map, and these include jump, from, new, old, text for setting the window limit in the X and Y coordinates, and then a bunch of other what seems like debugging text. Next, and my favorite unused text string, is a hidden message found in the game's third disc. This is a message from one of the game's developers to his wife. It reads, "Great special thanks to you, Ariko, from your husband, Hideji." I actually wonder if this Ariko even knows this exists. And that's not even close to being all of the unused text left out from this game. There are several more strings for the field segments, not to mention a plethora of unused dialogue strings. In the interest of time, I will be leaving these out from this video, but if you are interested in reading up more about them, I will direct you to the cutting room floor page, which is linked down in my sources below. But anyways, onto some unused graphics we go, fellas. First, only in the German release, amongst the graphics for the heads-up display for the submarine minigame is a hidden note in Japanese. This one's pretty straightforward. It translates to real depth for German, and it points to the Tiefe graphic, which is German for depth. Not sure what else I was expecting. Then, in a similar hidden manner, normally hidden away under the graphics for the 500 years later text seen after the game's end credits, scribbled is the original Japanese release date of the game, December 12th, 1996. A pretty slick little Easter egg. Also hidden is this guy in the prison well. He's actually always there, but the game just masks him out. It is believed that this guy might be some sort of cameo appearance of one of the game's developers. I think he needs a name though. Let me know what we should name him down in the comments. Then next is this unused portrait graphic. This placeholder contains the phrase "now printing" written in Japanese. We've seen these before here on Lost Bits, like back in the Mario Party 1 episode, and these are often used to simply convey that a final image just isn't ready yet. Since the backgrounds in Final Fantasy VII are just 2D images, I might as well lump them in here as well. There are actually quite a few unused or alternate areas left out from the game. In the interest of time, I'll just quickly go through them here though. And first, let's get the less interesting ones out of the way. There's Dummy, Black BGA, BGE, BGF, and BGG, White BG1, and White BG2, and these are all just empty black or white screens. Crazy stuff, I know. Then there's a hill-type area named Trap, Junmon, Spin 22, empty cargo ship storage room, TRNAD 53, an unused area for the Northern Cave, XMV Test, Fall P, and more. There are also several locations that, while they don't contain much data, it still has been predicted what they may have been. There's a great page on the lifestream.net site that goes into more detail into all of these maps, and some were even able to be loaded into. So if you're interested in learning more about these maps, I'll again leave a link to this site down in the description below. And while we're on the topic of unused rooms, now let's move on to some that I was actually able to access myself. And these ones, although unused, actually are more than just an empty area. We have all normally inaccessible Onna 1, Onna 3, and Onna 6. Onna apparently translates from Japanese to woman, so it's no surprise that all of these were meant for the Honey Bee Inn. Before we dive in, it's important to understand that these rooms all make up what the first floor of the Honey Bee Inn was initially intended to be. Here is a nifty little comparison, again from the lifestream.net, comparing the original design with the final used one. Anyways, let's get to the rooms. Loading into these wasn't all too bad, but Onna 3 and 6 just loading in would often cause Cloud to get stuck in something, not allowing me to move. So I had to warp into these rooms from several different areas until I managed to load in and move. Anyways, so for Ona 3, we have what looks like a lounge room at the inn, complete with furniture, some snacks, and a TV that flips through several fields from the game, including the beta design of Cosmo Canyon. Also, I forgot to mention this, but the door still swings open here to the lobby, but unfortunately there's no warp programmed for it at this point. Additionally, and more importantly, there are 4 possible NPCs that can appear here. First, pacing back and forth, is Quedge, Wedge's younger brother, who appears to not be very comfortable being at the Honeybee Inn. Then we got either Mucky or Mucky's friend, each which will appear depending on if you've interacted with Mucky already. Mucky will just talk about coming to his room after training, and Mucky's friend will just complain about Mucky ditching him. And lastly, but not least, we have this guy, just known as Red Jacket Guy. He basically just talks about Tifa hunting for men or something, but that's not the interesting bit. If you talk to Jimbo here after some events that occur, he will have alternate dialogue. If you come here with an underwear key item, he will keep mumbling about his affection for Tifa. But if you come here and skipped getting the underwear item, he will mention that he'll give you something good. Something he snatched from the clothesline in the back of Tifa's shop. That's right, this is how you can actually obtain the mysterious panties key item. Cloud mentions how the pattern on it looks like it's for kids, which is kinda all sorts of messed up. What the f***? Anyways, yep, there you go. Okay, moving on now is Ona 6, which I was able to get into normally, but to move around for whatever reason, the graphics got messed up, so here is what it's supposed to look like. This looks to be like another lounge room of sorts, and this time we only have 2 NPCs here. First is Chubby Old Man, who is apparently an employee of the inn having a little snooze. He basically just mentions that this room now belongs to the employees, and this place used to be called either the Adult's Nest or the Lovey-Dovey Nest. Then next is a guard who is seen looking out of a window. He actually offers a deeper, more serious conversation and talks about retreating into his own shell and not being able to see a star in the sky, which makes him want to leave Midgar even though he can't really bring himself to do so. It seems like a pretty out-of-place conversation given the setting. And last but certainly not least for the Honeybee Inn is Ona 1, and this is the scrapped lobby area. There's quite a lot to unpack here, so first let's talk about what we can see in the background. Probably the thing that sticks out the most here is the large TV. It flips through 4 different screens, 3 of them are ladies with the messages reading, "Chat with beautiful women, welcome to my nest," and "How about some honey?" Sure, honey sounds pretty good. Then this slide is a menu of sorts. It offers 2 special courses. Wonder what those could be. A 30-minute course and one for 150 minutes. Then these fans at the front here translate to Honeybee Beauty's welcome. The heart here says to go up to the 2nd floor, and then this sign is a warning that all other brothel owners, scouts, and minors are prohibited, and that trying to poach away a hostess will result in a 100,000 gil fine. Then on the left side of the lobby, the screen sign reads, "Today's Girls," and above the door it just says, "No entry." Here we can also see, I guess, today's girls, one of which apparently is supposed to be Tifa. Okay, and now onto the characters and events that go on in this lobby. First, again staying on the left side here, is this fella sporting a rat tail. He seems to be having a rough time deciding which girl to choose and mentions that he's interested in Tifa. If you can get him to confide in you, he will also mention that he already has a relationship with another girl, but get this, even after 3 years of seeing each other, she still won't even let him hold her hand. Here you go, sir, you dropped your simp card. Next, if you try to go up the stairs here without being admitted, the somber guard from the previous room will rush down and stop you and tell you that you gotta pay to go up there. Then next at the counter area, we got a receptionist, a regular customer who looks like the guy that gives you the Honeybee Inn membership card, and finally the Shinra manager. For starters, the customer guy just mentions how he starved 3 days for this. And then the Shinra manager just goes on about how great it is that he can afford to go to a place like this due to his job. But the reason this lobby, I think, stands out more than the other two rooms the most is that there are actually 2 whole cutscenes that can occur here involving these characters. The first of these occurs after agreeing to wait in line behind the Shinra manager. Then, after the receptionist calls for the next girl to come out, a honeybee girl comes from the dressing room to cheers of an unseen crowd. She then thanks the customer for waiting in text that flashes like it were limit breaking. The honeybee girl then blows a kiss that turns into a heart at the customer, which knocks him right out. The customer then gets dragged out by the guard, the girl apologizes and retreats back into the dressing room as Cloud just shrugs. Then the next scene can be activated here by talking to the Shinra manager 3 more times. You basically eavesdrop into his conversation with the receptionist as he asks for a younger girl and then whispers his name to the receptionist because apparently it's some big secret. Now this is where the normally unused comical song I mentioned earlier was meant for. After another honeybee girl comes down from the 2nd floor steps, she is followed by Palmer, the head of Shinra's space program. Long story short, he turns into Wobbuffet after getting a kiss from the girl, notices his fellow Shinra employee and smacks him for being there. The manager tries to think of an excuse, comes up with a lame one, and then crawls and runs away in shame and fear that Palmer might transfer him or make him write up an apology letter for either also having spent time with this honeybee girl in the past or for simply just being there. And once again, Cloud shrugs. There's actually also a small third cutscene that can happen here if you come back with a membership card. Basically, another honeybee girl will be called up, will look at Cloud, and then skip up to the 2nd floor. Nothing crazy. Anyways, with this lobby and all of these cutscenes still more or less remaining complete, it seems likely that they were scrapped later in the game's development. Why exactly, though, is still up in the air. I do wonder if any of this will get added back in some form at least in the new remake. I'd love to see this in HD. Okay, and for the last stop of this video, as always, my favorite things to see in games, unused test and debug rooms. And thankfully, this game has quite a few to go through. First, we start off in this hub area of sorts with the Final Fantasy VII logo in the middle of 8 circles, each with a Japanese character on it. Each of these circles also leads to a different debug room, and in addition to those, walking either to the top or bottom of the area will lead to 2 more rooms, bringing the total to 10. Before we dive into each of these rooms, this hub area also contains a Yuffie model, and she is our gate to our first set of debugging options here. She offers some pretty nifty features here, toggling battles on and off, disabling the pre-rendered cutscenes, resetting your party or resetting the game's clock, starting a new game with your current stats, giving you every materia in the game, including the unused ones I mentioned earlier, and more. But then there's also Battle 999, which I think is the most interesting option here. This will take you to a test battle against a group of pyramids? They just kinda sit there and don't ever attack you back. I guess this was just a fight left in here to test basics like targeting and attacking. These pyramids, however, give you a whopping 500,000 EXP points and gil for defeating them, which is certainly nothing to sneeze at. What's even weirder is that this fight is actually different in the original Japanese release. The test pyramids are gone, and instead we fight 5 Deanglows in their place. The background here is also apparently unique to this fight. I find it kinda weird that this fight was actually regressed to placeholders in later revisions of the game. Okay, and now onto the rest of the debug rooms. So as I mentioned, each of these circles bears a Japanese character, and these are each short form for one of the developer names, and then of course the other developer names here on the top and bottom. In clockwise order, I'm probably gonna butcher these, we have Kita, short for Yoshinori Kitase, No for Kazushige Nojima, Tori for Motomu Toriyama, Matsu for Kesuke Matsuhara, Chi for Hiroki Chiba, Aki for Jun Akiyama, Yoshi for Kazuhiko Yoshioka, Kyo for Hideshi Kyonen, and then of course Takahashi Tokita and then Masato Kato at the top and bottom respectively. I can only assume they are named this way as each dev probably used their own respective debug room to test the things that they needed to. Anyways, now let's finally start jumping into these rooms. Starting off at the top with Kita, here we have 2 rows of characters, each with a different use for debugging. Although not in the same formation, this is basically how all of the test rooms work. Oh yeah, Cloud's pants also started glowing here for some reason. Anyways, first is President Shinra, and talking to him allows you to warp to various points in the game, mostly related to the ancient city. Actually, this is basically what most of the characters do in these debug rooms, just instantly take you to certain parts of the game in a matter of seconds. Super nifty if you want to get far in the game fast, or if you want to replay certain parts without needing to play the entire game over again. Like here, the glowing heiress will take you to several key points surrounding her character and her. But on the flip side, while this may be good, oftentimes these warps will leave you just stuck in something, being unable to move, so it's not all that useful sometimes. It's a hit or miss, really. In a similar fashion, instead of just warping to an area, many of these characters will also just take you to one of the pre-rendered cutscenes. Since there are so many of these characters that basically just warp you or cause a cutscene to play, I will be skipping over them, so if I don't mention what a character does in one of these rooms, this is why. The only other character in this room that doesn't just warp you to a different part in the game is Jessie here. Her menu actually allows you to change up your party. Here you can instantly add Aeris, Tifa, Barret, Red 8, Sid, Ketchi, Yuffie, or Vincent to your party. So I guess she must have been used just to test party management. Now on to the second room, we got once again more warps and cutscene menus, and Barret, who is another party management test. I guess I should mention the party management characters are also going to be pretty reoccurring here. The only character here with something different is the red-haired guy who provides the option of performing a global reset, which basically just resets everything including your party, time played, and more. The third room refreshingly has some more debugging features we haven't seen yet. Here, several button inputs will trigger some effects. After being greeted to the English version of the game, pressing L1 will toggle battles, L2 will set your team to consist of Cloud, Barret, and Tifa, R1 will bring up a reset flag string, R2 will reset the names of all party members and zero out your money count, but pressing R2 again will give you debug money, or 131,071 gil. Nice. Lastly, pressing square will do another reset thing, and this will remove all team members, money, etc. Apart from these though, just more warps and cutscenes, but there are some notable things here too. First, this old ancient will allow you to add Sephiroth to the team. Yep, he's all friendly now apparently. And then the other thing is from the Shinra soldier here, who although is another character that just warps you, he can take you to a scene that actually goes unused. This scrap scene is from the cargo train, and we can see Cloud run up to the camera and freak out before the game just fades to black. Then next is the fourth room as we spawn in surrounded by all of these characters. It's kind of weird. Unfortunately for us though, there's nothing here that's really noteworthy, so let's move on. In the fifth room, Cloud now gets to wield the Buster Sword, I guess to defend himself against his own clones here. Thankfully, the Cloud in the middle has some good news for us as he does something we haven't seen yet. Well, kinda. He partly is another warp, but this time he can instantly warp you to some of the game's mini-games like the Chocobo Race or the Shooting Coaster. Additionally, he can also let you rename any of the game's party characters. Party. Party? Un or oon? Yeah, sorry Aerith, I don't know what you want from me. Jokes aside, basically all she does is act as another party manager, but this time a bit more robust as she can set certain characters to a respective slot, which is kinda cool, I suppose. The lowest Yuffie here also has some goodies for us. She can give us 294,967,295 gil, but she can also take it all away, add and remove party members and items, give you 32,767 gold saucer bucks, give you 99 mega elixirs, 99 power and speed sources, and a bunch of other items in addition to making every materia mastered. Furthermore, she can also maximize your love points with Aeris, Tifa, Yuffie, and Barret, or just simply show you your romance stats with them instead. I gotta say, this Yuffie is definitely one of the more interesting debugging characters in these rooms. Next is room 6, and I'll give you 3 guesses as to what we'll find here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I really hope you didn't guess something other than more warps, cutscenes, or party managers. Next. Okay, room 7 finally has something notable for us. When interacting with Tifa here, although you can't see anything, she does offer 7 debug options, giving you 300 gil, giving you 131,072 gil, giving you 99 of every item, toggling battles on or off, removing all items, team members, and all that jazz. And once again, here she can also warp you to the test fight with the pyramids. Unfortunately for us though, the rest of the schmucks here are more of the same we've already seen. That said, some of the characters like the wrestler here can also take you to some other minigames. For room 9, there's a save point in the middle here, which just acts as a save point, go figure. And then Barret here will fill your materia list completely with Bahamut materia. And ending off on a high note, we have the 10th and final room labeled as Masato Kato. As soon as you load in, you are given 2 options, one for those in a hurry and one for those with some time. How nice of them to give us this option. They both do lead to a similar outcome, but the latter option is much more entertaining. First, you'll notice there are only 3 other characters here: a doctor, a nurse, and a giant heiress. While the doctor is just another warp guy and the nurse is just another party manager, of course the interesting stuff lies with and around Big Heiress here. Firstly, although most of her options here are just warps, the last option is a bit different. You can choose to go to a Hades area. Now, although Hades is a summon materia in the game, here I believe it's referring to Hades as the hell-like home of the dead, named after the god of the underworld in Greek mythology. To this, she will shake her head and say that you are already in Hades. Kinda spooky, really. Then, when walking around her here, you will also notice some other text boxes appear over nothing. Well, this is actually the floor talking to you. So I guess I lied. Counting the sentient floor here, there are actually 4 other characters. The floor will first warn you against stepping on it, and if you do step on it again in a certain area, it will yell out in pain, and then a really annoying ambulance siren-like sound will begin to play. I really do dig this kind of humor, so props to the devs for leaving this in here as a small little Easter egg, even though very few people would see it. And lastly for this room is another hidden secret. If you go and talk to the nurse and first choose I'm starting over and then princess, you will then get full control over Mega Heiress and you can run around in the area to your heart's content. You can't really do much as her, but I thought it was still a really cool little secret, and it was interesting to put her beside the other characters to see just how big she really was. Now that's all of the debug rooms in this area, but there is apparently one more debug room that is a leftover from an earlier build of Final Fantasy VII. Being from a prior build, it is very glitchy, incomplete as you can see all the characters faceless, and Cloud is also invisible to boot. Additionally, a very weird sounding version of Aeris's theme will play. Apparently it sounds weird due to this area using an older sound font used in previous beta builds of the game. Overall, a 10 out of 10 creepypasta tier debug room. To conclude, although these debug rooms did have some really neat features, this was certainly a case of quantity over quality. Like, I get that each dev probably wanted their own test room, but really, one character for warping, one for cutscenes, and one for party management probably would have sufficed, you know? But either way, these debug rooms were pretty fun to mess around with, and can't complain too much, seeing as how we got to play as Ultra Aeris. Alright, first up, by looking into the character folders for Sayori, Monica, and Natsuki, very early concept sketches lacking any coloring can be found for a few of their in-game poses. As you might have noticed, for some odd reason, the same style of sketches aren't present for Yuri in the files of the game. That being said, a single unseen file of Yuri can be found left over in the menu directory files amongst other regular files. This appears to be another early concept sketch, only this time it looks like it was an early sketch for the background instead. Next up is an unused dialogue found in the third act. Well, I guess it's more of a monologue actually. It's really interesting because it breaks the fourth wall for researching for lost bits. The monologue consists of Monica acknowledging you looking through the game's files, and she says, "Hey, I don't think you should be doing that. You know what I'm talking about. I really caught you doing something naughty here. You're just going through the files and looking for stuff you missed, aren't you? I mean, it's a little bit flattering that you want to hear everything I have to say, but it's also really embarrassing, you know. Seriously, what if I just opened up your brain and read all the thoughts you have on me? Come to think of it, that would be pretty tempting actually." Then Monica talks for a little bit longer, and then she says, "Just if you're looking through the files like this, then maybe you don't hate me as much as I thought. Am I being too optimistic? I think if I asked you to visit me once in a while, I would be overstepping my boundaries a little. Man, I'm starting to say some really stupid things. I'll go ahead and shut up now." I think it's definitely a nice little fourth wall breaking Easter egg to discover when browsing through the files, although it is a little bit weird. This monologue also has seemingly random letters and numbers between each line. This is actually a base 64 encrypted message that when placed together and decoded, it delivers another hidden message. It reads, "The realization must have taken me an entire year. A year since our escape, our freedom from between the stained walls of that unholy establishment. What does it mean to escape if the escape fails to unchain the bonds that shackle us in the first place? What purpose could this empty world possibly hold for us? A handful of damaged goods? With freedom we sought purpose, and what we found was only realization. Realization is the sad pointlessness of such an endeavor. Realization that freeing our bodies has no meaning, when our imprisonment reaches as deep as the core of our souls. Realization that we cannot pursue new purpose without absolving those from which we ran away. Realization that the farther we run, the more forcefully our wretched bonds yank us back toward their point of origin. The deeper our shackles dig into our callous flesh." It's unclear as to what this message is referring to or even what its significance is at all. Some fans believe it might be an unused poem from Monica which was meant to be used in the game at some point, or the other theory is that it might be alluding to a future game Team Salvato is working on. And for the last set of unseen things, by manipulating each of the girls' character files, a different unseen secret can be discovered. In the game's files, normally each of the characters has a .chr extension, which apparently is a CryEngine character file, and I'm pretty sure this game wasn't made with a CryEngine. Anyways, now normally we can't open these types of files, but tons of fans were clever enough to try and convert them to other file types and open them that way. And by doing so, a few secrets were discovered. Starting with Natsuki, when converting her file type to a PNG image file, a sort of messy, creepy image can be opened. If you've ever inverted a picture's colors before, you know the colors typically look something like this. So by inverting the colors back and flipping the image vertically, although still really creepy, we can now start to see what looks like a woman's face on both sides of the image. With a little bit more manual editing, fans were able to recreate this image as it was intended to be viewed. This creepy lady looks nothing like any of the characters in the game, and it isn't even in the same art style either. Again, many believe this to be a teaser for a future game by Team Salvato, but the fact that it was so cryptically hidden makes others believe that the image might have more to do with this game than we think. Similarly with Monica's .chr file, by converting it to a PNG file, a creepy eclipse-like picture reminiscent of the ring can be seen. And in the middle of this ring is what looks to be TV static, but upon closer inspection it is just an array of white and black dots which can be read as binary. This binary string is translated to another base 64 code which can again be decoded once more to reveal another hidden message. It reads, "Can you hear me? Who are you? I can't see you, but I know you're there. Yeah, you can definitely hear me. You've been watching for a while now, right? I guess I should introduce myself or something. My name is... Actually, that's stupid. You obviously already know my name. Sorry. Anyway, I'm guessing if you were able to put a stop to this, you would have done it by now. I mean, I know you're not, like, evil or anything, because you've already helped me so much. I should really thank you for that, for everything you've done. You're really like a friend to me, so thank you so much. I think more than anything else, I really don't want it all to be for nothing. Everyone else is dead. Maybe you already know that. I'm sure you do actually. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? Well, there's lots of stuff I don't understand. I don't know if it's even possible for me to understand it. But I know this isn't my only story. I can see that now, really clearly. And I think everyone else has had the same kind of experience. Some kind of deja vu. It's the third eye, right? Anyway, I could be totally wrong about this, but I really think you might be able to do something. I think you might be able to go back, or however you want to put it, to go back and tell them what's going to happen. If they know ahead of time, then they should be able to avoid it. They should, if they remember their time with me in the other worlds, they should remember what I tell them. Yeah, I really think this might be possible, but it's up to you. I'm sorry for always being, you know... Never mind, I know that's wrong. This is my story. It's time to be a hero. Both of us. 2018. Now at first, this sounds like Monica speaking to the player again, but then stuff like the third eye and other worlds are mentioned, so it seems less related to the main plot of this game. Again, many fans see this as likely a teaser for a future game in the works, especially with the 2018 at the end there. Strangely, Yuri's character file doesn't need to be converted and can be opened in a regular text editor. This reveals yet another base64 encrypted text string which, when decoded, translates into the first paragraphs of a creepypasta called "I found a box containing the story of a 19-year-old girl who killed a random person for no reason," posted by an anonymous user on June 22nd, 2015. Dan Salvato, after which Team Salvato was named, eventually admitted that he was the author of this story and that he included it in the game as a simple Easter egg for players to find. Lastly, and probably most creepy, is Sayori's character file. Unlike the other files where they needed to be converted into a PNG image file, Sayori's file instead has to be converted to the .ogg audio file. When converted, the file sounds like this. Even when reversed, slowed down, or sped up, no notable sounds are distinguished. However, when putting the file through a sonograph program, which produces a visualization of sound frequencies, a QR code can be seen. Scanning this QR code takes you to a website called Project Libitina. This website documents the physical examination of a 3-year-old girl named Libitina. This exam also mentions the third eye as mentioned previously in Monica's file. The exam also outlines that Libitina has weird cases of twitching, vocal tics, harm to the examiner, and misplaced laughter. A test was also performed for physical and emotional response and control, as well as activating and suppressing the third eye. She was also tested for her response to both a minor and major threat. In the footnote of the report, someone mentions that Libitina has not yet recovered from the termination of a redacted name, and that her health is deteriorating. I seriously have no clue what any of this could be about, and it seems to have no relation to the main game. But seeing as how the third eye is mentioned several times, it is very likely related to Monica's file, and again, this is probably another well-hidden teaser for a future game. So in part 1, we covered various cut and unused artwork as well as many hidden secrets in the game's files. Well, it turns out there are a few more unused and hidden things that I missed. First off is an unused head pose for Natsuki in which she turns away from the player. Looks like it was meant to be used if one of the other characters said something to make her mad. Similarly, there is yet another unused angry expression, this time for Yuri, as well as another unused expression in which Yuri is smiling, but her eyes have huge purple pupils, similar to when her unfortunate event occurs. Next is an unused font not seen in the game, labeled Y2 and appropriately named As I Lay Dying. It is believed that this font was likely to have been intended for Yuri's wheel poem. When compared side to side, we can see how similar yet different they really look. And with that, as of the making of this video, that is basically all of the unused content that anyone has found and officially confirmed. For the next part of this video, although not technically unseen, there are various Easter eggs, poems, and other occurrences throughout the game, mostly in Act 2, that are either seen randomly or the player has a set percentage chance to see. So even if you've watched a playthrough of the game or have even played it yourself, chances are you probably haven't seen or noticed many of these. And as always in typical DDLC fashion, many of these are pretty weird. To get an idea for what I mean, let's start things off with an occurrence with Natsuki. In Act 2, after showing your poem to her and she doesn't like it, there's a 33% chance that after reading it, her eyes will quite literally pop out of their sockets. Similarly, in the second act, on the third day, there's a 25% chance that when the player speaks to Natsuki near the closet, her normal mouth will be replaced in favor of a creepy, realistic-looking one, in addition to her eyes being covered by some sporadic black pixels. Natsuki will also nonsensically say, Meebles, Sailcloth, Blindsight, Lifeline, Anan, Rectipitality, Faultlessly Offered Scleromalacia, Nade, Catholicate. I don't know if someone has found a meaning or reason to these words, but to me it seems like someone was just flipping through a dictionary and picking out random words. After creating your poem in the first day of Act 2, there's a 1 in 6 chance that a creepy, half-stained, half-seemingly burnt page featuring Sayori's head with pupilless, red underlined eyes will scroll down while some ominous, distorted music plays in the background. This is obviously a reminder of what had just occurred when Sayori was hanging out with the protagonist just moments before. One of the rarest possible occurrences in the game happens during the poem word selection part in Act 2. If you're lucky enough, there is a 1 in 101 or less than 1% chance that Yuri's normal sticker will be replaced with a distorted, creepier one when selecting one of the words related to her. This one just reeks of some stereotypical creepypasta thumbnails that I've seen on YouTube. Also in Act 2, after closing one of the secret poems, there's a 33% chance that the game will now have a red filter and the sound will be muffled. The screen will then turn black until the player clicks in order to bring the game back to normal. In the same spot, there is also a 33% chance that the player's cursor will turn into a glitched part of Sayori's artwork for a moment. Speaking of Sayori, there is a 14.28% chance that anytime the classroom background is loaded in Act 2, one of the posters will be replaced with Sayori's death scene. Just another subtle reminder for Monika in case you forgot what just happened. Okay, pretty much all of these are in Act 2, so I'll just stop referencing it. In the act, there is also a 1 in 3 chance that Monika will enter the scene in her glitched phase, and there's also a 1 in 3 chance that Yuri will welcome the player at the start of the day without a head. After one of the poem minigames, there is a 1 in 16 chance that a sheet of corrupted Sayori images will flash between 2 color schemes for a brief moment. Next, there is a 2% chance that whenever you try to access the menus, this weird watercolor style portrait of Monika will flash on the screen for a split second. It's unclear whether the red blotches on this painting are indeed paint or blood. Lastly, there are 2 special occurrences that happen when loading the game. The first one will replace the typical disclaimer text when booting up the game that normally says that the game isn't suitable for children or for those who are easily disturbed. There's a 25% chance that this message will be replaced by one of the following quotes. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. I missed you. Play with me. It's just a game, mostly. This. Null. I have granted kids to hell. It was only partially your fault. Don't forget to back up Monika's character file. This game is not suitable for children or for those who are easily dismembered." Or lastly, PM died for this, which may be a reference to the Project M mod for Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which Dan Salvato, the creator of this game, was also a developer for. As you saw, most of these replacement messages are pretty ominous and obviously coming from Monika. And for the last random happening, again at the menu, when booting up the game with an Act 2 save, there is a very small 1 in 64 chance that instead of the normal home screen, you will start with a backwards end screen, then a black and white menu with no background and more distorted music. You'll also notice that all of the girls are missing their eyes. There also aren't any buttons that can be seen or pressed, so you won't really be able to start the game, so the only real option is to close the game and reset. When you do close the game, after a short delay, the screen will zoom into Monika's face quickly before closing. Similarly to the previous occurrences, each time you play through the game, 3 special poems can be seen through the run. These 3 are randomly selected out of a possible 11 poems, so again, unless you've played the game over several times, chances are you haven't seen most of these. These poems include a drawing of Sayori hanging out, text saying, "Can you hear me?" and a mostly redacted poem with the letters spelling out, "Nothing is real," among some others. Some of them contain some pretty dark themes and words, so in the interest of monetization, I will have to leave them out. But if you do want to check them out and the rest of the poems that I didn't mention, I will leave a link to the site where most of the information for this video was taken from, and you can see them there. At the end of the game after Act 4, you are given the option to stay with Monika. She will then start up random different dialogue themes, and there are over like 20 that can occur, but I just wanted to go over 2 of the ones that I thought were the most interesting. The first one occurs if the player is streaming or recording the game using either OBS or XSplit. Monica will say, "Hold on a second, you're recording this, aren't you?" Hi everyone. Sorry I can't read your comments from here, but do you mind telling your friend it's a little rude to start recording me without warning? Then eventually she will try to jump scare both the player and the audience if the game is being streamed. There's also a chance that Monica will start talking about Super Smash Bros. She will say, "Hey, have you heard of a game called Super Smash?" Wait, what? I was just spacing out and started talking for some reason. Was I programmed to talk about that? Because I have no idea what that is. Sometimes I feel like I'm not in control and it's kind of scary. But if you have some way to contact the people who created me, maybe they'll know why I started saying that. This again is a reference to the fact that Dan Salvato has worked on several mods for Super Smash Bros. Melee and Brawl, such as the 20XX mod and Project M. Alrighty, let's start things off with some unused audio, shall we? First is an unused holotape simply known as Test Holotape.
Finally, someone with a modicum of civility and common sense. I represent certain interests, and those interests view this town, this megaton, as a blight on a burgeoning urban landscape. You have no connections here, no interest in this cesspool's affairs or fate. You could assist us in erasing this little accident off the map.
As you heard, this test holotape is related to the Power of the Atom quest, in which you have to make the choice between disarming the nuke stuck in the middle of Megaton, or detonating it.
Kaboom!
Next up is an entire scrapped radio station. Tenpenny Tower Radio was going to be another radio station the player could listen to, sponsored by This Old Fart. Interestingly, several audio files from this cut station are still found left over in the game.
Thank you for listening to Tenpenny Tower Radio Service, brought to you by Alistair Tenpenny. This is Tenpenny Tower Radio. You're listening to Tenpenny Tower Radio, the sound of progress. This is Tenpenny Tower Radio, music and inspiring talk for forward-thinking people.
The Tenpenny Tower radio station would also feature several proverbs which were to be called Tenpenny Truisms.
And now it's time for another Tenpenny Truism. And now a Tenpenny Truism. The poor man wishes for prosperity. The rich man makes his own. We must turn our thoughts away from that which is imperfect and impure. On that vast plain of dust we will raise new cities, and like the phoenix, spread the wings of new life and take flight. Never wonder for a moment if you're worthy of the benefits you possess. Rather wonder always if you have utilized them to their fullest. All men were created equal. Not all men remain so. The beggar must lay down his cup, for a man needs both hands to grasp the future. Let us release our fears of the past into our hopes for the future. The poor man wonders why he is poor. The rich man knows why he is rich.
So it turns out that Fallout 3 also has a handful of quests that were scrapped. The first of these quests would have been known as Infiltration, which would have had the player enter Rivet City through an underwater diving hatch and obtain a prototype power source to bring back to Scribe Rothschild at the Brotherhood of Steel base at the Citadel. Since the quest ID is between the American Dream and Take It Back main quests, it is likely that this quest was intended to take place between them as well. The next unused quest is listed as Last Rites. Not much is known about this quest as no objectives were left over, but it is believed that it was the basis of the Broken Steel DLC. The last completely scrapped quest is simply known as MS-07, which would have apparently involved Sarah Lyons from the Brotherhood of Steel. Again, not much is known about this quest since basically all traces of it are removed. All that is left is this strange, also unused disc that would have served some purpose in this quest. Although not a completely unused quest, there is a scrapped step that would have appeared in the Wasteland Survival Guide side quest. This extra step would have had the player actually print a copy of the survival guide at the Hubris Comics publishing building and then return it to Moira, who apparently at this stage in development was known as Leia. The Wasteland Survival Guide quest is already pretty long as it is, so I can kinda see why the developers decided to remove this step. And next up, let's have a look at some of the more interesting characters and creatures that were cut from Fallout 3. Starting with the cut characters, we have a Gary template that is sporting your in-game dad's Vault 101 jumpsuit instead of the Vault 108 one that they normally wear. Next is this guy, who goes by the name Littletoe. He would have had a minor role in the Replicated Man quest in which the player has to search for a missing synth. Similarly, there is Trigger, who was also associated with Littletoe and the Replicated Man side quest. The Johnsons are scrapped NPCs that would have resided in Andale and still have some scripting in which they interact with the other residents there. Also unused, we have Meat, Paladin Northup, Lucy West's father, who ended up appearing in the game as a decrepit corpse, Stacy, and this guy known as Sleeping Guy. I wonder how they came up with that one. We'll get back to him later. There are also 6 generic templates for hunter NPCs meant for Rock Creek Caverns. The next character, Professor Malleus, wasn't cut from Fallout 3, but he is normally never seen, and as such, this model for him is never used. Now, if you don't remember, Professor Malleus was the Vault 92 scientist that was in charge of the Vault 92 experiment, in which low-frequency white noises were played through the Vault speakers to try and brainwash the Vault's dwellers. Although there is no model left for him, there is also a scrapped NPC known just as O'Grady. Not much is known about what his purpose would have been, but he would have been some sort of guard, and he would have used a unique police baton weapon known as O'Grady's Peacemaker. And now let's go over some of the unused creatures and robots. First is Clancy, a uniquely named centaur which would have apparently had some sort of role in the Wasteland Survival Guide quest. There is also an unused colored version of the dog that is actually your father in the Tranquility Lane simulation. Since the simulation part of the game uses a monochromatic color scheme, it makes sense why this version is left unused. Although these aren't found in the game's files, in the official Fallout 3 art book, conceptual art for 3 unused floater variations can be seen. The Lamprey, Manowar Tendril, and Needletooth floater variations are all absolute nightmare fuel. Now, as far as unused robots go, there is an unused generic Mr. Handy variant known as Mr. Mulberry, as well as several unique versions of some of the other robots, such as Brotherhood of Steel and Enclave Robobrains and Sentry Bots, as well as some other unique variants of iBots and Mr. Gutsies. Okay, so there are a lot of unused weapons, armor, clothing, and other items in Fallout 3. So in the interest of time, I will only go over some of the ones that I find more interesting. If you are interested in seeing the rest, follow the links to my sources in the description. For unused clothing and armor, there is the Blastoff space helmet, a pair of female and male night vision goggles, pink T-45D power armor, jumpsuits for Vault 87 and 95, and male and female versions of a Wasteland scout hat. Then, as far as unused and unobtainable weapons go, although most are just uniquely named variations that are visually identical to other weapons in the game, there are a few original ones that are completely unseen. For example, first is the Cryolator. This weapon later made its debut in Fallout 4, where its design was completely revamped. Also scrapped are 2 Molotov cocktail variants. One using a bottle of whiskey, and the other a Nuka cocktail, which would have used a bottle of Nuka-Cola Quantum. A lighter would have been used to light both of these, and it was also scrapped from the game. The lighter would have used this texture, which was later reused in the lighter in Fallout New Vegas, which is used to light the sticks of dynamite. Other unused miscellaneous items include fly meat, a first aid kit, as well as super stim packs, which were again later seen in Fallout New Vegas. Furthermore, Fallout 3 also has several projectiles that are never used. These projectiles include flaming spit from an ant queen, a crossbow bolt, a boulder, and a vicious dog? Yep, thanks to Phil, we can shoot dogs out of a gun. Beautiful. And now on to Fallout 3's unused graphics, which again, there are a lot of. First up are several unused Pip-Boy images featuring Vault Boy. These include images for carry weight, critical chance, action points, damage resistance, healing rate, HP, unarmed damage, poison resistance, radiation resistance, and Vault Boy wearing a jumpsuit from Vault 95 and 100. It is possible that these vaults, or at least the jumpsuits, may have been planned to be seen in this game. So far, only Vault 95 has been playable, but in Fallout 4. There is also an unused image for the Light Step perk, which originally had bear traps. These bear traps were changed to landmines in the final release. Throwing was also going to be a skill in Fallout 3 that was scrapped and reworked into the explosive skill. Its Vault Boy image can still be found in the game. Other unused Pip-Boy images are of several of the game's weapons, a mini nuke, a museum token, a box of food, night vision goggles, and a super stim pack. Fallout 3 also has several unused image notes. One of the Arlington Library, a bloody sketch that would be found in the Dunwich building, Megaton's nuke, the playground in Minefield, a Mirelurk spawning pod, and the Galaxy News radio station, which is, for whatever reason, mistakenly referenced as Tenpenny Tower. Fallout 3 also has several world objects that were cut. These include unused street signs, signs meant to be used in the Citadel, unused metro signs, a bank sign, signs for a Bureau of Special Affairs and a Center for Extra-Typical Research, a fusion generator, a violin case for the Soil Stradivarius, ya boy Liberty Prime on a crane, a photo of the player's parents, a photo of Project Purity, a photo of Tranquility Lane, pre- and post-war versions of some kind of mower with their remote controllers, a recycler, a high-resolution TV, several bits of unused Raider graffiti, and the Emancipation Proclamation. Ooh, that was a long sentence. There are, of course, a few more cut world objects, but these are the ones that I thought were the most interesting. And lastly, for the unused graphics, there is an unused load screen, which sounds like Brotherhood of Steel propaganda, and a satellite photo of Washington, D.C. with Fallout 3's map overlaid, I guess to show how much of the area is covered in the game. Moving along now to my favorite part of this series, unused test rooms. And thankfully, Fallout 3 has quite a few for us to explore. As with the other stuff, I'll only go over the more interesting test rooms, as some of them it's too dark to see in, and others are pretty basic and were likely just used to copy and paste into other areas, like these bathrooms, for example. First up is a room listed as Warehouse Robots. It basically just houses a Mr. Gutsy and several Protectron variants to see how they would function and respond to the player holding an employee or a military ID and such. Similarly, the Warehouse Traps room is a collection room that was probably used to test the traps in the game. Tripwire traps, hanging grenades, trapdoors, baby carriage explosive traps, baseball launchers, electrocuted toilets, you name it, this place has got it. Also, the trapdoor leads you down to an empty area that reminds me of some of the abandoned vaults in this game. There's even a nice death claw that we can play with. Alright. Next is Megaton Abandoned House Dummy Cell, which, just like the name suggests, is a stripped down version of the house the player can receive in Megaton. Really cool early development stage test map, but unfortunately not much else to see here. I was curious to see just how much it changed, so here's how it compares to the final version. Random Encounters is a rather small room that is apparently used for spawning in random encounter NPCs in the game. Interestingly though, for some reason, the gene projection machine seen in the intro of the game when creating your character can be seen floating in the middle. Next up are several similar looking rooms that contain a few characters likely used to test how they interact with each other. There's a room with just a Mr. Gutsy, one with some rad roaches and an assertive wastelander corpse, and one with some super mutants and their captive. Oddly, for some reason, each of these rooms has a door. That leads to nowhere. Real nice. Test QA Hugh Lai is named after one of the character artists for Fallout 3 and contains numerous NPCs. Adults, kids, ghouls, raiders, they're all here. I honestly don't know if I can handle this much dominance asserted on me. Similar to the last room, there are also 2 rooms, one for males and one for females, which contain an NPC for each of the possible hairstyles in the game. And for some reason, all of the females are wearing party hats. So, you come here often? Fine, didn't want to talk to you anyway. Next are 2 areas probably made by Grant Suthers, the special effects and gore artist. Yup, gore artist is on someone's resume. Anyways, the first of these unused maps is known as T Grant Int, and it features several interior effects. These effects include several lighting techniques, effects of a gas leak in a room, a glowing one, and a dismembered T-posing super mutant? The developer memes in Fallout 3 were way ahead of their time. The other Grant Suthers area is known as T Grant World, and in contrast to the previous map, this one tests some outdoor effects. Here we can see some circling lighting and fire effects, smoke from a crater, and this force field. Just outside the city ruins, there's also a vertibird as well as some sort of 3D warning exclamation mark thing. I'm really curious as to what this was used for, so if you know what it is, please let me know. Kit Office is next, and it's basically just a large, unfinished office building interior. It unfortunately can't be fully explored since the area boundaries are too small, and Fallout 3 does this stupid thing that if you get to the boundary, you get teleported back to the spawn. It's almost as if they didn't want the boundaries to be broken. I sure hope you aren't getting tired of these test rooms yet, because we have a few more to go. I said we'd talk more about the Sleeping Guy NPC earlier, so let's get back to him. Sleeping Guy is actually found snoozing in an unused test map known as Test QA Items. This area has several mailboxes which contain almost every item in the game, from weapons, armor, notes, ammo, and more. So if you're looking for a certain item or weapon, this is your best place to check. There are also several other locked mailboxes, probably used to test the game's lockpicking mechanic, as well as several computer terminals, again, likely used for testing the game's hacking mechanic. This area also has a pile of radioactive waste, several mines scattered on the floor, as well as some stop signs, for some reason. And yes, Sleeping Guy. All he really does is sleep, wake up, walk to the other bed, and go back to sleep. Living the dream. Up next is QA World Origin, which is probably the largest unused test room that I have come across so far. When loading in, you start in an otherwise unseen area in the middle of a burnt out forest. This area has a few NPCs that walk around, as well as some Mirelurks and Yaoguais. There is also a small building which can be approached, which is home to a test merchant which you can still interact with. And as big as this immediate area is, if we clip through where we normally would be stopped, an even larger Washington DC landscape can be seen and explored. Oddly, for some reason though, the ground is way higher than it normally is, so something like the Jefferson Memorial can't be normally seen. And the last interesting unused area is an early version of Vault 101 that can still be accessed. You start off in an isolated small room, so to access the rest of this area you have to disable collision and fly through the walls. There's nothing all too crazy in this beta vault except that we can see that some of the rooms are empty or even incomplete. And before ending this video, there are 2 more interesting things that I want to go over. With the console commands on the PC version, several cool things can be played around with and tested, like turning off collision, flying around, and God mode, where you have unlimited ammo and can't be hurt. When turning collision off and killing an enemy, something super strange happens. As soon as they die, their body just goes whack and stretches like Mr. Fantastic. Or better yet, something from the movie The Thing. I have no idea what causes this or what determines the position they end up in, but it's honestly one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen in a video game. On a brighter note, there is some dialogue that is unseen under normal circumstance. This can be accessed by using console commands to fly up to the megaton gate guard known as Stockholm. Since it is normally almost impossible to get up here without cheating or being a platforming master, after complaining that you are distracting him from being on the lookout for raiders, he will wonder and ask how you managed to get up there. A nice little Easter egg the developers left in for players curious enough to get up here. While we're up here in Megaton, if you manage to clip inside the area, you'll notice that it does match up with the actual Megaton area decently well, although the buildings are much less detailed. Alright, so let's start things off with some enemies that go unused. There are 2 NPCs that are left over in the game and can actually still be modded in, but they are never normally spawned. First is a jungle variant of a mimic enemy. These behave like the other mimics, but for whatever reason, this variant is left out of the game and normally never spawns. Then there's also this white cultist archer. This appears to be a solar cultist version of the blue cultist archer. Interestingly enough, despite never normally being implemented, there's also an unused unique white cultist archer banner. Since the devs went through the trouble of making this extra item, it's likely it was a later decision to not include these, but why they're lingering around in the game's files is a good question. Now, those were the enemies that can still function in the game if loaded in, but next we got several enemies that, while data for them still exists in the game, they are incomplete and as such can't be loaded in at all. First up is this snowman with a dynamite embedded deep in his head, simply known as the Exploding Snowman. The snowman's NPC ID is right after that of the Frost Legion, made up of Mr. Stabby, Snowman Gangsta, and Snowballa. So based on that and their similarities, the Exploding Snowman was very likely going to be the 4th variant of this squad. The exact reason the Exploding Snowman was scrapped is unclear, but oddly enough, apparently in one of the game's update changelogs, it stated, "The Frost Legion is back, now with another member," possibly referring to the Exploding Snowman, but this of course never happened. What's even more interesting is that despite never being used, the Exploding Snowman even got its graphics updated in the version 1.3.5 update. Why would the developers remake a sprite for a character that was never used? Perhaps they were still considering introducing him at some point, who knows, but as it stands, the Exploding Snowman never made it in. Sorry, fella. Then we got this unused severed hand enemy that was supposed to appear as part of the Solar Eclipse event. Just like the White Cultist Archer, the Severed Hand too has an associated and unobtainable banner. Next up, although the graphics are used, there's NPC data left over for mini Flow Invaders. These look identical to the minions spawned by the Flow Invaders, but I guess at one point they were intended to be a unique standalone NPC as well. Similarly, there's unused NPC data for Nun 2, whose image file is the same as that of a Wandering Eye enemy. Its NPC ID actually precedes that of the Wandering Eye, so based on that, and considering its name is literally Nun 2, this was probably some placeholder test enemy. And lastly for the NPCs is one known as DD2 Attacker Test. It apparently looks identical to the Angry Tumbler enemy, and it is believed that, based on the DD2 and test in the name, this NPC data was used by the developers to test something in the Old Ones Army Dungeon Defenders 2 crossover event. Then, although not an unused NPC, there is an unused alternate sprite of Fritz. Here he just gets a more greenish look, which kinda makes sense since he is a reference to Frankenstein. I guess they had to pick one between the two, and this one ended up winning. Moving on, Terraria has one debuff effect that was never implemented. It's called Dazed, and similar to the Oozed debuff, it was to greatly decrease the affected player's movement speed to a third of normal speed to be exact, and jump height was also to be reduced. This debuff has been around since the version 1.3 update, but never made it to the big leagues. This is unlike the Sugar Rush debuff, which for the longest time was unobtainable until the final 1.4 update, in which it is now obtainable via the Slice of Cake item. And while we're talking about some unused stuff that's now been added in, after being quickly removed from the game when it was first launched for apparent legal reasons, then being introduced as an exclusive item in the 3DS version, the Zappinator has also been reintroduced in an orange and gray variety as part of the Journey's End update. So now you can blast away enemies with the totally not NES Zapper to your heart's content. Next, this game also has its fair share of miscellaneous unused graphics. First are 2 unused tile sets of also unused grass types. There's this tile set of yellow-green grass textures titled Tiles to Beach, and based on the name, this was likely intended to be a grass variant for the beach biomes. But instead, the beach biomes just use the regular green grass texture. Then there's also Tiles_199 Gross, which appears to be very similar to the game's flesh blocks. And these tiles were apparently to be some sort of alternate version to the Crimson Grass. Then next up we got these unused early sprites for the drill containment units, as well as this fella, who is apparently a test graphic for the newly added bestiary. And finally there's this empty buff texture. This was very likely just used as a template by the developers when making the graphics for the buffs. And now onto my favorite part, Terraria's unused items. So earlier I mentioned the unused banners for the White Cultist Archer and the Severed Hand, but there are also normally unobtainable banners for several other enemies. These include the Blue Cultist Casters and Fighters, the White Cultist Casters and Fighters, Poisonous Spores, and lastly there's an unobtainable Small Star Cell banner. Then, just like the NPCs from before, some normally unobtainable items can still be accessed via mods and inventory editors, while others only have partial remnants left in the game, and as such can't be accessed at all. For the ones that can still be added in, first are several unobtainable Luminite tools. These include the hammers, axes, and chainsaws in the Solar Flare, Stardust, Vortex, and Nebula variety. These were all likely scrapped in favor of the ham axes, which, as the name suggests, fulfill the function of a hammer and axe, and even chainsaw, I guess, making the respective standalone items redundant. Even so, these still looked really cool. Just like the ham axes and pickaxes that are used, these were also likely once planned to be obtainable after defeating the Moon boss. Next up, we have this unused pixel box. When placed in, these can be hooked up with wires and the box will light up with an incoming signal from the left or right and turn off from the top or bottom. Then we also have this white star that surprisingly, despite just being added in the final update, it is normally unobtainable, and even if you do manage to mod it in, it has no function, and interestingly it is listed in the game's files simply as unknown. Also added in this update, but unobtainable, is this skull bow, which is apparently believed to have been found in or near the dungeon. I have no idea why the developers would be introducing new, unused things in their seemingly last update, so I have a strong feeling that these might get implemented in maybe a smaller future update. Then the next unused weapon is the first fractal. Looking like a beefier version of the Terra Blade, apparently this weapon was scrapped in favor of the Zenith sword. Interestingly enough, Zenith's codename was the Final Fractal, so it's also likely that the first Fractal was an early version of it too. That said though, to further solidify what I said earlier, apparently when asked why this weapon is unobtainable, the developers said that it simply wasn't ready yet. So just like the other items I mentioned prior, this too might get implemented in the future. Anyways, as you guys have been seeing, the first fractal causes a bunch of them in a range of colors to zip across the screen wherever you click, basically decimating enemies on screen in no time at all. Honestly, I think it's super satisfying to watch. Next, there are 3 treasure bags that are normally unobtainable. First is the Lunatic Cultist Bag, and it is programmed to drop silver coins as well as offer a 14.29% chance of rewarding an Ancient Cultist Mask. Now is a good segue to the unused items that are incomplete in the game and as such have no function. The other 2 unused treasure bags are an Ogre treasure bag as well as a Dark Mage one. Each one does have its respective graphic, but that's about it. Next, all unused, there's the Kobold Dynamite backpack item, an Etherean Javelin, an Ogre Mask, a Goblin Mask, a Goblin Bomber Cap, and an Apple Pie Slice. The Apple Pie Slice was also introduced in the newest update alongside a full apple pie, so I guess the developers just felt the slice might have been redundant. Also, just like the White Star, the Slice 2 just carries the name Unknown. Next up, we got the Unused Phasic Warp Ejector, as well as its associated disc projectiles. Outside of just being a projectile launcher, its exact effects are currently unknown, but being found situated between the Charged Blaster Cannon and the Influx Waver, it is believed that the Warp Ejector was planned to be related to the Martian Madness event in the game. This item seemingly hasn't been touched since the 1.3 update to the game, so I'd be surprised if it ever gets re-implemented. And lastly here, there's also this bunch of Zeds, and just like the previous items, it doesn't seem to do anything. So up until now, everything I've been referring to is either for the current gen and PC versions of the game, but let's take some time to talk about some items that go unused in the last gen console versions as well as the 3DS. Now these were basically just not added because they stopped receiving support, and their last update was the desktop equivalent of between about versions 1.24 and 1.3. I won't go into any details here since these are found in other versions, but I'll quickly just show them on screen. There are also a handful of items that are found in the last gen consoles, but just not in the 3DS version. These include a bunch of watches, a tool belt, and a ruler. Yeah, no measuring in the 3DS world allowed. All of the normally unobtainable items I mentioned up until now still do have remnants found in the game's files, but there are also several other ones that are completely removed from the game. First of these is the Ice Morn that was added to the game's files as an unobtainable item back in the 1.2 update, but promptly removed in the 1.2.4 update. Its removal, similar to what I discussed earlier with the Zappinator, was likely due to copyright reasons, as its name and likeness resembles that of the Frostmourne sword from World of Warcraft's Lich King. I'm guessing Blizzard probably didn't like this reference. Similarly, there was the Soul Scythe, which was also added as an unobtainable item in the 1.2 update, and this one was removed in the 1.2.2 update. Once again, this was probably removed due to it being, I guess, too much of a reference to a similar looking weapon from the anime Soul Eater, after which I'm sure this was named. And once again, with the same old song and dance, there was also a regular scythe that was added and removed around this same time frame, once again likely due to it being a reference to Soul Eater. Biome key molds in a jungle, crimson, hollowed, frozen, and corrupted variant were once found in the game as well, with the purpose of crafting biome keys to open biome chests. These were eventually also removed in all versions but the 3DS one, in favor of the keys just dropping instead of needing to craft them using these molds. Then next, there's the Boring Bow that, based on its ID placement, it's believed to also have been meant for the Dungeon Defenders 2 crossover event. Next, there's this Okrem mask that has also been removed, at least in the console and mobile versions of the game. And speaking of the mobile version, let's also show some love to the mobile gamers out there, as there are several things that were exclusive to that version but have also been removed. For items, there was a mysterious package that definitely resembles that of an Amazon box. This was to summon a pet drone that would apparently drop a book every few minutes, and it is believed that this was going to be an exclusive item for those that bought Terraria through Amazon. Similarly, there was a pot of gold item that spawned in Leprechaun O'Fife, who would have had a chance to drop some coins. 5 rainbow pieces, which have also been removed, were needed to craft this, and these were only seen falling from the sky, much like fallen stars, during the St. Patrick's Day season in the game. Ultimately though, as of the mobile version 1.3.0.7, the pot of gold has been replaced by the gold bunny. Oddly, the guide NPC mentions that the rainbow pieces are part of a greater object called the Prism Danan, but there's no trace of such an item or object in the game. Next up is an entire scrapped seasonal event as well as its associated content. This content includes a cut McMoneypants NPC, a flying mythical wyvern enemy, as well as 3 items, a red envelope, a firecracker, and my favorite, the mythical costume. And to this day, it is unclear why exactly this event was never implemented. And since the files were removed from the game, I doubt it will ever end up seeing the light of day. And then lastly, for the mobile version are 2 structure types that could be generated in the world, but have since also been removed. First is a sanctum that used to appear in the jungle biome, basically a larger version of a jungle shrine. And secondly, there was also the Heart Shrine, a smallish heart-shaped structure that could be generated in the snow biome. These heart shrines were guaranteed to contain 2 crystal hearts as well as a frozen chest. Not bad. Next up, although these aren't unused or anything, there are several new secret seeds for world generation that have been added with the latest updates. First is a world known as Drunk World, which can be created by using the seed 05162020, which is a reference to May 16th, 2020, the date of Journey's End's release. In short, this Drunk World basically just results in both the Crimson and the Corruption evil spawning at the same time in the world, in addition to several other smaller changes. Then next, by entering Not the Bees as a seed, a world will be generated that is mostly bee-related with bee items, biomes, etc. The title is a pretty obvious reference to Nicolas Cage's infamous line from the 2006 movie The Wicker Man. And the last currently discovered secret seed is called For the Worthy, and this essentially increases the game's difficulty a lot. It is even referenced internally as the Get Good World. Interestingly, For the Worthy is also a reference to the once unused item, the Red Potion, whose tooltip read, "Only for those who are worthy." The Red Potion was also unobtainable all the way up until this last update, and it's only found in either this seed or the Drunken one I mentioned earlier. So I guess most people still won't ever see it unless they try these 2 worlds. And last up for this video are Terraria's debug features. Now these are super easy to access on PC and aren't a big secret or anything, but a debug feature is a debug feature, so let's cover it. By pressing F7, a bunch of debug text will pop up on screen, and I believe these time the rendering process for various things such as different tiles and lighting. Similarly, pressing F8 will bring up some multiplayer debug info. If playing single player though, these all appear at 0. Pressing Shift F9 cycles through the game's 4 different lighting settings: white, color, retro, and trippy. And lastly, I guess most PC games have this now, but by pressing F10 you can toggle a small FPS counter on the bottom left of the screen. Nothing too crazy, like I said, but at the end of the day, I still really like when developers leave little debugging things like this for us to see.